Banks, and I'm the tour organizer for the 2016 Main Roads and Crossroads Connecting the Dots Tour, presented by the Florida African American Heritage Preservation Network and the Riley House Museum. Funded in part by the Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs and the Downtown Improvement Authority. I'm here with Professor Randolph Lightfoot, who teaches American history and American government at St. Petersburg College. He's going to share some enlightening history, Florida history, on the go. Also, we have our videographer, Mr. Marcus Brown from St. Petersburg, Florida. Professor Lightfoot.
Thank you, Sandy, and welcome everyone. Before we get, you have to deal with the foundation of the state of Florida and its origins. We know that Florida was first discovered by the Spanish, who were the first European group on the North American continent that had a permanent settlement here on the continent. But Florida, as a landmass, was a vast territory. You know, when you think about the British coming in and establishing the 13 colonies, well, Florida was considered to be really like the 14th and 15th colonies. They belonged to the Spanish. The British wanted the area because Florida, because of the Catholic heritage of the Spanish, Florida was a safe haven for runaway slaves. And Florida was one of the main points of slave insurrection and slave freedom in the North American continent. Well, the Spanish lost control of Florida when it sided with the French in the French and Indian War between 1754 and 1763. When that war was over, then the British then took control of the territory. The Treaty of Paris, they gave them the land. They took all the Spanish territory that was west of Louisiana, and they took all of the territory that was east of the Apalachicola River. And the British set up the kind of government where the Florida territory was so large that they divided it into two areas, East Florida and West Florida. See, you have to realize what is now currently the state of Florida stretched from the current state of Florida all the way over to New Orleans, because that was Louisiana territory.
Well, Professor Lightfoot, I've heard that Florida has been under several flags. So, like, when you're talking about the different territories, and that how
they were under the French flag, the Spanish flag, the British flag, the American flag, the Confederate flag. So Florida has had a very history of many countries being in charge of the state of Florida. But when the British took control of the area, they wanted to fill the area up with slaves because they wanted to cut out the idea of Florida being a safe haven for slaves. So they began to import slaves from Angola to fill up the state of Florida. And it remained that way for a number of years until the American Revolution came along. And when the American Revolution came along, the British fighting against the Americans. Now, Florida, East and West Florida, and as I said, it was so vast, the territory was so vast, and all those areas along Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, the Panhandle, and the bottom part, and along the coast, that was all part of West Florida. And it was such a large area that the British had trouble controlling the area. So in order to better control the area, they divided into two areas, East and West Florida, with the East Florida capital being St. Augustine and the West Florida capital being Pensacola. Now, with that in mind, the current capital, Tallahassee, was made simply because the travel they had to do to conduct business in the slaves during that particular time period and transport goods, it was such a long journey between the two capitals that the business leaders decided that this area right in the middle, Tallahassee, this small Indian village, would be a perfect place for a capital because it was exactly halfway point between Pensacola in West Florida and and St. Augustine in East Florida. Well, the British ruled the area for about 20 years. When the American Revolution came along, surprisingly, East and West Florida didn't join the American Revolution. They remained loyal to the British. Now, the only reason that East and West Florida became a part of the United States was that during the time of the battle, the French came in on the side of the French, and the Spanish came in on the side of the Americans. And the Spanish said, okay, if we help you with this, we want our territory back. And the Americans promised them, okay, if you help us defeat the British, we will give you your land back. And the first naval battle that we had were supported by the Spanish. The Battle of Pensacola Bay, the Battle of Mobile Bay, those were Spanish ships. When Washington found out how much money he had to fight the American Revolution, they said from records, it said that Washington didn't speak for 30 minutes because he was trying to figure out how he was going to defeat the greatest land and sea power on the planet with such a paltry sum. Well, the Spanish people already know about the French and Lafayette coming in to help the Americans. But what they failed to realize was that the Spanish came in. They were the first ones to provide ships and cannons and guns and ammunition and things to Washington, and gave him a large loan to help him fight against the British until the French came in. Because the French were not going to come in until they knew that the Americans would win at least one battle. Because, you know, the French and English were natural enemies anyway. Mm-hmm. And since the English had won the French and Indian War, it was nothing better for them than just to tweak the nose of the English by coming in on the side of the Americans and along with the Spanish. So after the war was over, the Spanish got their territory back. And so we've got to realize now, the only reason that the Spanish gave up Florida to the British after the French and Indian War was that the British had invaded Cuba, and they held Cuba, so they gave up Florida to get Cuba back. So that was the arrangement that was made during that particular time period. So if they hadn't defeated Cuba, then they would have still had Florida, but they wanted Cuba back. So they said, we'll trade you Florida if you'll give us our capital back in the matter. And they made the deal. And Florida then became a part of the Spanish territory. Now, the Americans were growing at that particular time period. And blacks that had been in Fort Mose, which was a free black territory just outside of St. Augustine, where blacks had control, and in Fort Washington, sometimes it was called the Negro Fort, up around Apalachicola. What had happened was that the blacks in that area had control of the Apalachicola River. Whites had to pay to use the river in order to transport their goods. They didn't want to do this. Andrew Jackson, who wanted to regain Florida for the United States, because at this time, Florida was a safe haven again for runaway slaves. So once you got to Florida, you were free.
Is that how Jacksonville got its name?
Jacksonville was named after him because, see, many people don't realize that. See, Andrew Jackson was, I remember they used to have the Jackson Day Parade in Tallahassee. They cut it out because so many people hated Andrew Jackson. He was the Indians didn't like him, other whites didn't like him, blacks didn't like him, the Spanish didn't like him. He was a rough frontiersman, but he was beloved by the people on the frontier because he was just like one of them. And he was the type of person that said, okay, he was a slave owner himself now, runaway slaves, I'm going to go and get them back. So he attacked Fort Mose to try to kill that settlement and bring back his runaway slaves. So Jackson was the kind of person that he went into the Florida territory. He told the Spanish that if you can't control this territory, maybe you need to turn it over to someone who can. Well, what Jackson did when they complained, he hung the Spanish official, he hung a British official, and created an international incident that President Monroe had to deal with Spain and Britain because of the actions of Andrew Jackson. Now, the white settlers around Apalachicola called Jackson in They said to protect them from Indians and the blacks that were attacking them in the area, but really it was because they didn't want that control that the blacks had over the Apalachicola River, and they were making a great deal of money from that. So they called Jackson in, and at Fort Washington, which was called Fort Negro, as I said previously, Jackson attacked the settlers there, and his men fired from the boat. One of the shells hit the magazine dump that had all the ammunition, and 300 people were killed. And Jackson came in and just took the territory, and Spain, Monroe, the settler area, he quickly signed the Adams-Onis Treaty, which turned the territory over to the United States, and we gave Spain $5 million to compensate them for that. But Jackson had already taken the territory. And what a lot of people don't realize, that Andrew Jackson was our first territorial governor. He was territorial governor of Florida. Jacksonville was named in his honor because he took the Florida territory and gave it to the United States. Now, Florida's current border, where we border with Alabama now, the reason we lost that territory, because I told you at that time, West Florida extended all the way to New Orleans. But Congress passed a law saying that those Gulf states had to have an outlet to the sea because all of them were landlocked. So Florida lost all of that territory that was part of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. Along the coast, that was reverted to those states so they could have an outlet to the sea. And that's how Florida lost that territory. And its border went back to where currently it is now, around Pensacola.
Has there ever been any kind of controversy or any kind of, I guess, people wondering why wasn't Jacksonville the capital, or why Tallahassee?
Well, previously we said that Tallahassee was because of the midpoint between St. Augustine and Pensacola. But much of the travel and much of the state business was taking place along the Panhandle in that area. Jacksonville will have its turn coming a little bit later in our history. But it was a small village during that particular time period when Jackson took over. But Florida eventually grew, and Florida became a state in 1845. I had to wait because, as you know, during that time period, they were trying to keep a balance between slave states and free states. And Florida couldn't come in because there was not a free state ready to come in. But in 1845, there were two northern states that came in. I believe it was Iowa and Minnesota during that time period. So that allowed Florida and Texas to come in as slave states during that particular time period. And as the Civil War was approaching, Florida then left the Union. It seceded from the Union. After South Carolina left, Florida was the very first southern state to leave right after South Carolina. So Florida left, and then South Carolina left, and then the rest of the southern states became part of the Confederacy. Now, during the Civil War, Florida's capital was the only capital in the Confederacy that was never invaded or taken by the Union Army. That's because the Florida Confederacy was very powerful in the state of Florida, and you didn't have as many troops. Most of the troops for defend Florida were stationed in Jacksonville, and there was one major battle in for Florida at that particular time period during the Civil War. It was the Battle of Olustee and Natural Bridge, and black soldiers. That was one of the first time that black soldiers fought against the Confederacy in Florida, and as a result of that, you had troops coming from Jacksonville and all the way up from Tampa, because Tampa was a Union stronghold during that particular time period. And they fought, over 300 blacks were killed in the Battle of Olustee. The Confederates won that battle, and that was the last time they ever tried to get close to Tallahassee, because Olustee was outside there. It protected Tallahassee. So they fell back to Jacksonville. And the reason so many blacks were killed was that the leader of the Florida Confederacy, the cavalry there, Colonel McCormick, gave the order, there are to be no Negro prisoners taken. Now, the white soldiers that were injured in battle or captured, they were sent to prison. he said no